And we had a book that come in the mail by Julian Batchelor.
Yes.
I read it, and I'm with him on the issue of co-governance. It's a very dangerous thing. What's your position on co-governance?
So, first of all, can I say I've read the book too, that he's put together? Yep, and I know Julian Batchelor. I've known him for a long time. I knew who he was and what he was doing before then. I knew the situation where he's come from. And so first I want to say is that when I've heard Julian talk, I believe there are things that have come from his own circumstance. You would have heard him talk, which is about his situation up north where he had a piece of land and had an issue with local Māori that were there. And I believe the fact is that, and the reason I'm saying this, is the posture of your heart when you speak about an issue actually determines the way you're presenting it. And I believe at the moment, the posture of his heart is coming from a place of bitterness. Now I'll answer your question. I just wanted to say that out first, because I know this man. And co-governance is not new. Co-governance, when I was a minister, one of the other ministers, Chris Finlayson, he was the Minister for Iwi and Crown Relations. Part of what he had to do is deal with treaty settlements. Inside of that, he had the Waitangi Tribunal, he had himself here. And then what they did is that in this context, there were conversations about co-governance, about arrangements around treaty settlements and what that would be between the Crown and the iwi. What is new is that this current government, with Minister Willie Jackson, have taken co-governance out of that context and all of a sudden try to apply it to everything. And so here's how it amplifies itself. Socialism is about power and control on a continuum. The governmental mechanism of power and control is called centralisation. So centralisation is saying this: bigger is better. Three Waters is a classic example of centralisation. Te Whatu Ora, the Ministry of Health, 20 DHBs is centralisation. Te Pūkenga, all the vocational tertiary training is centralisation, bringing them all under one. So once you've got the centralised types of control, here's what they did. They took co-governance out this, and then they tried to dump it on top of it. Now that's wrong. Because what you did, you try to apply something in one context and try to say it's a one-size-fits-all. And I don't believe that's right. I would stand against that. But here's what I wouldn't do, is do what Julian is doing, is saying it's elitist Māori, it's wrong. He's tried to interpret the treaty, by the way, in his own means. I tell you this now, and you've got historians who've looked at what he's written. There are so many errors. But that's the reason I say to you, when the posture of your heart is from bitterness, you can drive another agenda. That's my only concern about what he's saying. And what's happening? You know what it's doing? It's becoming weaponized to divide us as a nation. I don't agree with Willie Jackson and what he's doing. I don't agree about the way that they have done that. To impose it upon a people, it's wrong. Should never have done that. But now, co-governance has become weaponized. It's become a divisive word in our country. So here's what happened when I was a minister. Here's what happened when I was a parliamentarian. People started saying, let's have a Māori caucus here. Let's have a Pacific and Asia caucus here, and let's have a mainstream caucus. Unfortunately, they called you mainstream. I don't know why they did that. And here's what they said. And then they said, yep, Māori caucus, turn around and say your thing. Pacific and Asia and mainstream. I challenged that because I said that's not going to make us any better as a people and as those in those parliamentary situations. Why don't we create a safe space where people can ask tough questions like, I don't understand or I don't agree. But they don't do that. Instead, what they want to do, they want to keep us enclosed in our little circles. Now, that doesn't make us better as a nation. And what Julian is doing at the moment, what other people are doing, even Willie Jackson, he's getting to the point where anyone challenge this, here's what they do. Throw out the race card. You're a racist. And I'm going to tell you that, I don't stand for when Willie Jackson says that. When good people cannot ask a question, a genuine question, that number one, I don't understand, number two, actually I don't agree, then why can't we have a space like that? What Julian is doing the same thing but from another end. Now we're getting people saying to us, and I've heard them, just the other day someone said, oh, Julian has told me we're going to vote for the ACT Party and David Seymour. Do you know what David Seymour is wanting to do? rewrite the Treaty of Waitangi, send it out to a referendum. I can tell you this now, that will further divide this nation. It's careless, lazy, political posturing, just trying to make people happy. You've got Winston Peters, who's turning around and saying this, let's get rid of all the Māori names on government departments. Now, I agree that they got it wrong. The government of the day got it wrong. Why didn't they have a bilingual naming so people understood what they mean? Just going too far. Again, lazy, careless leadership. There was not doing the right thing. But what we can't afford to do is then use this political posturing, appease people by saying, let's just go back, elitist Māori and labelling. You know what it's going to do? Further divide us as a nation. And so if you want to hear my heart, I believe it's time to heal us. I believe it's time for someone to have courage to say, let's have a courageous conversation here. Because David Seymour, I can tell you this now, he will divide us as a nation. And Winston, what he's saying, is not going to make it any better. Because now he's saying, oh, we're not Indigenous, we're not that. Just trying to appease people, and people clap, that's right. So where is he going to take us? I tell you where he's going to take us. He's going to say all these words, it's going to take us back, that's going to further divide us as a nation. Now, I'll stand in any court, I'll stand in any forum, and I'll debate with them, and I guarantee you, all their posturing does not mean nothing. You know, we're not here to be peacekeepers. Peacekeepers wear blue hats and have a flak jacket that say United Nations. We're here to be called peacemakers. And the difference is this. A peacemaker is not afraid to go into a situation of contention to bring peace. And that means when you're in there, you're not afraid to have courageous conversations. Because out of it, good things can come. Good things can come. And you know, when I was a parliamentarian, we'd go up to Waitangi. Moka used to ring me and say to me, sweetheart, are you okay? And I said, why? All we saw in the news was protesters doing this and people spitting and people yelling and people getting really angry. And I said, well, it happened, but it was just like a little thing on the side. And what the country saw, though, was angry Māoris being activists. What they didn't see were rooms where there were iwi leaders sitting around talking together to find a better way. Media don't want to talk about that. So what's happening? We're dividing us further as a nation. We're creating a stigma about things that actually weren't as big as what they said they were. And we didn't even go and see any place that told the true history of our nation. And so what opened up is that I went to a place called up in Marsden's Cross. People may know, Samuel Marsden came in 1814. And when he came in 1814, he came with a paramount chief called Ruatara, who brought him to a place called Ohi Bay. You know, there are stories that no one's telling where they came together and they surrendered themselves. They came to a better place where even these paramount chiefs like Kawati, who's one of the first signatories to the Treaty of Waitangi. And you know why? Because Henry Williams, what he did, and this is this value of faith, right? And when people say to you, no, your religion doesn't count. I don't have a religion, I have a relationship. I've got a faith that gives a set of values. Henry Williams was a courageous man. He was a peacemaker. And when he had 24 hours to translate the treaty into Māori and English and English into Māori, he introduced a new word called kawanata, which means covenant relationship. And how do I know it makes a difference? Because when Stephen Joyce came to me and said, Alfred, I've got to read a passage from the Bible at the dawn service. And he said to me, can you help me? I said, Stephen, what do you think this is? Dial up a Christian and he's going to give you a passage? Anyway, he just looked at me and I said, I'm just joking, I'll give it to you. I said to him, read Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14 to 18. He said at the dawn service, all of a sudden these kaumata got up and said, yay, kia ora, kia ora. And he said, that went really well. Here's what the passage said. The dividing wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile was brought down but by the cross of Christ so that they would become one new man. He introduced a word called kawanata, which means covenant relationship. Ngā Pui elders, here's what they say. Te kawanata o te treaty of Waitangi, a covenant that would unite two people to become one. Now, no one wants to talk about that. But when you talk about that, now the relationship begins to change. That's what we're called to. That's what Tracy and Watson and us and all 11 of us are called to. We're called to be peacemakers in our nation. Because at the moment, if ever there was a time where peace needs to be made, it's now. It's now. And that's where I get really concerned. I get fired up when I see the carelessness in the political field where they're just saying words. And then now he's got a banner that says, stop co-governance. And everyone goes, yes. Julian Bash is saying, stop co-governance. And everyone says, yes. But what are you going to do? And how is it going to make us better as a nation? It's not. Because they haven't got to a point where they understand what really will make peace in our country. To unite people together. And I believe the fact is that we can make a difference. That's what I'm committed to. I know, sorry, that was gee, you got me fired up here. I genuinely said, look, I know where you're coming from, seriously. I get this question every single political meeting, public meeting we have, because it is a concern. I know you come from a good place when you're asking that question. Because why? It's created fear in our country. People are afraid of what's being taken away. I didn't agree at all with the Three Waters. I didn't agree with the way that it was being pushed upon people around elected, unelected. Now it become not only confusing, but it started to anger people. And this is the sort of leadership that came from a government where all of a sudden when it could rule on its own, when it didn't have a coalition partner to hold them to account, all of a sudden they not only made bad decisions, but now the fruit of that we are starting to bear now. This is what we're dealing with in our country. And you need to have people who've got conviction and courage.